Hello and welcome to How Technology Can Enable Public Procurement, a webinar presented by Public Spend Forum and our sponsor, Coupa. My name is Jonathan Messenger. I'm the executive editor of Public Spend Forum, and I'm going to get out of your way very quickly here. I just wanted to let you know, if you're not familiar with Public Spend Forum, we're a global community and knowledge network for everyone who participates in the public sector market. We're here to help global government professionals, suppliers, and everyone involved learn and collaborate so we can help improve public spending. And I just wanted to point out that to the right of the slides, you'll see a Q&A window. At any point during the discussion, if you have a question, please type it in that window. We'll get it, and we'll file it away for a Q&A session at the end. So just type it in there as they come to mind, and we'll address it at the end as our speakers will speak to your questions. And with that, I'll hand things off to Ash Beatty, Public Spend Forum's Managing Director of Strategy and Research. So Ash, take it away.
Thanks, Jonathan. Hello, everyone, and thanks for attending this webinar. I'd like to introduce two of our other speakers, Pierre Mitchell, Chief Research Officer with Spend Matters, and Max Goralnik, Managing Director with Deloitte Consulting. As we go through the content today and the discussion items, we'll be exchanging perspectives amongst ourselves just to round out the various points of view that we have and the perspectives that we have pertaining to technology in public procurement. I'll kick things off with talking about challenges in public procurement and how technology for procurement can line up well in addressing some of those challenges. Pierre will then talk a little bit about parallels in the private sector as it pertains to procurement technology, as well as the procurement technology landscape itself. And then Max will talk a little bit about a very interesting case study in the public sector and immediate steps that you can take in thinking about how to identify and implement a procurement technology solution within your organization. So to kick things off, on slide number 3, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the challenges in public procurement, which line up extremely well with technology as an enabler. And a lot of this information is coming from work that various public organizations are doing across the globe, including state governments in the US, the federal government, and governments overseas as well. And some of these challenges include things like lack of process transparency, and that is that when a procurement needs to be done, do all the interested parties, the bidders, suppliers, other government folks, do they have visibility into the full breadth of the process itself, when they can participate, what the opportunities are, and at the same time? So the first issue is really around process transparency. The second issue is around spending visibility, how much organizations are actually spending, how much they're spending on what, from what set of suppliers, and who the key internal users are that are doing the spending. And from a technology standpoint, we find that having better access into spending visibility can really support strategic decisions that need to be made within the organization. The third key challenge that we've highlighted here is around supplier participation and performance. It's a bit related to visibility in that suppliers, through having technology enablers, be it a portal, be it other means of communicating opportunities to the supply base, can have equal access to opportunities as they emerge. And then downstream, in terms of day-to-day procurement, there's opportunities to improve how supplier performance is managed as well. The fourth item that we have on here is around engaging customers internally, streamlining that process for procuring items on a day-to-day basis, and technology support of making that much, much more efficient. And then finally, another key challenge that we've highlighted here is around spending compliance, and that is ensuring that the organization understands what the sets of preferred suppliers are within the organization, what the set of negotiated agreements and contracts are, and just making sure that everyone, has, on the front end, has visibility into that information and that knowledge as to how different areas of procurement are managed, and then ultimately making sure that the right sets of things are taking place. All of these challenges and technology as an enabler is meant to achieve the sets of public procurement outcomes that are identified here as well. Ultimately, it is about achieving mission goals, managing value, doing it efficiently. It's also about abiding by regulations, be they federal, state, local, or whatever the governing characteristics are for that set of regulations, and then ultimately also about achieving social policy goals. So that's a quick tee-up in terms of the key challenges in public procurement and how technology can help. I'd like to now turn it over to Pierre, who's going to talk a little bit about parallels in the private sector.
Thanks, Ash, and thanks everyone for attending today. I'm going to move pretty quickly through my section, just to give a little bit of a glimpse as to what some of the more advanced industries and just more advanced practices that are happening in private sector, to just be a little bit of a glimpse of the future, because you do see that companies, any organization will tend to move through very similar sets of evolution within their procurement process. And so just thought I'd just give a little insight into that, and then kind of we'll make the jump over to the technology side as we go along. So yeah, if you had to kind of summarize the overall evolution of procurement in the private sector, basically there is a focus from how do we move from kind of process efficiency, to cost reduction, namely around purchase costs and reducing price, to reducing total cost, but ultimately how do we move towards how do we really just help the stakeholders get more value from the suppliers and from their limited spending and budgets that they have to get more innovation and just to support ultimately the mission or the program, whatever you're trying to do. And as you move through this evolution, basically what you see is companies start with, hey, let's just make sure the process is, it's working, it's documented, we focus on the process, but it's very transactional, it's tactical. And then what happens over time is we say, well, let's start focusing on where the money is, follow the money, right? That's where we start getting into, let's focus on sourcing and contracting, and how do we negotiate better, how do we manage, those, how do we consolidate our suppliers, let's say to preferred, suppliers that we're going to work with. And how do we do that using a notion called category management, and how do we segment our suppliers? Just like you'd want to segment your customers, you segment your suppliers and manage them in a more fine-tuned way. And then once you kind of do your sourcing, then you want to manage those suppliers, and you want to manage them a little more deeply. You certainly want compliance and contract compliance, but you also want to actively work with those suppliers to get innovation from them and really have them put their best foot forward. You don't want to just have, drive-by sourcing events and then throw it over the wall, and hopefully you'll get some, realization of the value that you were hoping to get when you negotiated that. And so that's where you get into the whole execution, and hopefully you've built upon a solid foundation there. And then as you get, move up into the more strategic realms, you start working with, what do I do around strategic suppliers, whether they're large contractors and BPO firms, and how do we use them as an extension of our own organization? How do we take that supply market innovation and actually bring that internally into the procurement and supply chain function, so that we can really practice what we're preaching and bring that stuff in through cloud systems, through managed service providers, through how do we really bring that impact internally? So that's generally the story around evolution.
Hey, Pierre, in regards to the various drivers of value that we're talking about here, has technology been able to enable all of these things equally?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think typically, what you find is that the technology evolves usually somewhat in lockstep with these areas. But what's actually funny is if I look back, 15, 20 years ago, you found that what the process maturity and practice maturity was a little more sophisticated than what the systems were able to accommodate. So, doing good strategic sourcing work, but, basically running it on, the BAS system, which is, the big ass spreadsheet, and there's still a lot of spreadsheets out there, right? But, but now things have flipped, and actually with what's happening around the innovation with, cloud-based suites where, hundreds of customers are giving real-time feedback to the providers, and those are getting baked into the systems, and you are updating and revving these systems up every, month or two rather than every 3 or 4 years on, an ERP death march, and we'll talk about that in a second. You're really getting a lot more innovation that's available just right off the shelf in the software, and it really just becomes a question of by adopting the technology, you actually can adopt a lot of the best practices that are built right into it, and increasingly you're seeing a lot of service providers, consulting organizations and BPOs that are infusing their knowledge into these systems. So it's a bit of a flip. Actually the technology is not just being an enabler, it's actually kind of helping to lead the best practices that you want to drive into the process, and that's actually a good thing. So
in any of these areas, do any of these areas like really jump out in the way of the benefits imparted, right? What ultimately you can achieve with technology that you'd have a really hard time doing without it? It's a kind of a different take on the previous point.
If I had to pick just one thing, it's maybe not necessarily just in any one box. I would say, in the IT world, there's data focus and there's process focus. And I think the biggest thing here is around turning data into information and insight that drives you to the source of the best value. And if you don't have data, then, because of fragmented systems, then having your processes automated is not just an efficiency play. It's a way to, by driving adoption, you can really get insights as to what's actually happening out there in how are people spending their money, on what, and how long is it taking? Are they spending it well? Are they spending it? You actually get insights into the spend data, and then having that data drive you to where there's an opportunity. So if there's one thing I'd have to pick, it'd really be around analytics and making sure that you're getting good data out of your systems to help identify where there's some opportunities. And if you don't have good systems, that's where you got to get systems that are very easily adoptable that people will use, so that generates the data that you can then use to pull out of there and see, hey, okay, where are some additional opportunities? So I think turning data into information and insight is probably the biggest thing.
Okay, great.
All right, let's go to the next slide. Everybody's going to get a leave behind with this slide, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. But I think the biggest, trend that you see, if I had to pick kind of just one overall trend, is there's this notion from purchasing going to a functional kind of savings-driven mentality and just process-driven mentality with the purchasing process, and maybe in public sector, these acquisitions. It's kind of getting out of that functional silo and kind of really working with those who actually own the spend and own and are owning the supply, to work with them to say, right, what is it you're trying to do? What is the budget that you have? Let's look at our supply base, that we have already contracted, but let's also look more broadly if that won't work. And how do we then really architect this supply base and this supply chain to support what the strategic mission is. Now, obviously, if you have lots of low-level fragmented contracts and spend that you can aggregate into some larger agreements, whether it's laptops or wherever you're doing this, and I know in public sector there's been some early approaches there. That's great, but I think the biggest thing is really kind of working as a business partner with the function. A business partner with those who own the spend, and really make sure that you're involved with them during their planning and budgeting processes, and that you know what's coming, so that you can then better figure out how to help them by bringing better market intelligence around what the suppliers that are out there, and really getting a jump on it versus waiting till the last minute where you're brought in to, hey, negotiate, help negotiate the deal and maybe knock off a few percentage points, if you can or whatever. So that is the shift for moving from a siloed, tactical function optimized around, cost reduction, to much more of a facilitator and money manager and value manager to help those business units and those functions. Anyone that owns a budget, help them get more value out of, the suppliers and the supply base.
Pierre, this might be related to the previous points that we were just talking about. A lot of these things here, which are notional but very, very important, can really happen by reorienting the organization, maybe evolving the mission of the procurement function within the organization, and just these management types of refocusing of the mission, that is, right? A lot of these things can happen just by doing that. What would procurement technology do in terms of adding to the equation here?
That's a good point. In fact, why don't we bring up the next slide just to kind of transition us a little bit. But in terms of on the technology side, like I was saying before, I think one of the biggest things is if procurement is going to kind of step out of its function or role and move into more of this spend management, supply chain management role, the biggest thing is really to be able to use technology to do two things. So one is have the data to show where there is an opportunity through the lens of the stakeholders. Hey, it's your budget, it's your money, and these are your suppliers. Tell us what's the big problem. Are you not getting the service levels that you expected from the suppliers that you've already contracted? Do you find that you're paying too much for things that really shouldn't cost that much, and there are some opportunities? Are you not supporting the mission well because just the processes are too archaic and broken? So I think the biggest thing is maybe starting with strategically through the lens of that stakeholder. But the other piece is really, though, more around enabling those stakeholders. And rather than saying, hey, I'm in procurement and here's my process that I work through, and by the way, I'm trying to drive some strategic sourcing and rationalize the suppliers, and really, it's about bringing your agenda to the table. If you can really just much more radically enable those stakeholders, and if you're trying to push, let's say, self-service procurement and requisitioning and push that more and more to the stakeholders, it better be an easy process and an easy system. Otherwise, guess what? They're going to go around it. They're just going to use their P cards. They're not going to use the right systems. And now you have maverick spending. And so that's where you need the data to show what's going on. But you can't just be, you got to have a little bit of a carrot and a stick. You can't just, punish them for being non-compliant when the process was really crappy and the technology was really crappy because it was designed for power buyers in purchasing and not for those who are really just looking to get the products and services that they need. So yeah, the technology is really helpful when you're trying to overcome these legacy operating models and metrics and the brand of procurement. So the more in which procurement can have new tools that actually help, and you can actually be an enabler and a gate opener to look what suppliers are doing, but also just to make it much more, the system and the process, much more intuitive and kind of what you would see day to day and how you use your mobile systems and how to use on your smartphones and all the stuff you're seeing in B2C. Really just try to enable and make life easier for you and reduce friction is, what folks like to say. That's really important. And if you can do that and lead by example, you are actually helping to do change management by actually leading, versus just saying, oh, I don't have the resources, people are not complying with me, they're not following this mandate I'm trying to set up, because you're trying to drive your own agenda versus enabling what they're trying to do. And the beauty of enabling it is once you get you can enable it, now you have the data to continue to then work with them and say, here's where we need to change some things. We need to change how we consume. We need to change some suppliers. We need to change our approach on this. So that is the biggest thing around how technology can help overcome some of these barriers that I've shown, these first three barriers. And then on the last one, which is really around resources, this is where technology really helps, which is this shift from just, people trying to do their best with and reinventing the wheel with, tools like, Excel and SharePoint and, little niche custom tools, and you're relying on IT and these complicated systems to, this shift towards much more cloud-based, knowledge-based kind of resources, things that you can just turn on very quickly and help you be successful to move outcomes and business metrics and program metrics versus, IT having its own siloed function, which is, go bang in the system, do the ERP upgrade, manage this custom system. That is just way too slow, at least certainly in the private sector, to just, based on the pace of change that's happening. So definitely it can be very helpful.
Are there a set of key drivers or maybe a tipping point in the private sector, just as a parallel? Is there like a tipping point or set of drivers that really were behind the broader adoption of procurement technology across organizations?
Usually it happens, I kind of call it on the bookends. There's adoption around, as you kind of push out of procurement, further upstream into your, into your stakeholders around understanding their planning and budgeting processes, their, demand. The tipping point comes when they actually see procurement as an enabler and as a partner in that versus kind of a detriment and a bureaucracy and a gatekeeper. That's when they actually see that you're trying to really help them to support their outcomes. That's the tipping point. That's the switch. It's like, oh, they're actually here to help me, improve my objectives, and using supply markets and suppliers to do that. That is the key transformational tipping point. But there is also a piece to around how you go out to suppliers. And this whole thing around supplier enablement and supplier adoption, they are key stakeholders in this process as well. And if you can't onboard them easily and make it easy, a win-win for them, they're going to just drag their heels. And if you have thousands of suppliers dragging their heels, guess what? Your transformation program and your systems project is going to grind to a halt. So there is definitely a major kind of supplier enablement piece to this as well.
Great. Ultimately, it sounds like it's about working with people much more effectively with the right set of tools to help make their goals and objectives well aligned with yours and to help them achieve their goals.
Absolutely. And so I guess let me wrap up on. I got one more slide, and I know it's a little bit busy, but this is it's a good transition to kind of understanding the technology landscape a little bit more. And the way I've kind of oriented this slide is to look at this overall process called source to pay. So if you think about procurement as a process, a lot of people kind of look at the end-to-end process as a source to pay process. So we're planning our spend and the suppliers we're going to use, whether that's tied into a planning and budgeting process or some other process. We're then really engaging. We strategize on how we're going to engage the suppliers, and we engage them commercially. We come up with our contract, and then we're going to manage them against the things that we want from them. That is kind of the sourcing and supplier management, strategic procurement. And then you have kind of the execution piece, right? E-procurement, catalogs, requisitions, POs, receipts, invoices, payments, kind of end-to-end. Now, honestly, a lot of the process actually starts here with the need. A stakeholder has a need, and it might start in e-procurement, and that's why you then need to feed that back into the sourcing process, and you have to be able to move very quickly. So there are lots of systems that are out there that deal with various pieces of this, but more and more what you're seeing is kind of a trend from kind of a big ERP system that kind of does a lot of these things sort of well, but really oriented around the power, quote, power, buyer, which is often around the transactional side of the house. That problem led to a lot of best-of-breed cloud-based tools that popped up in e-sourcing and contract management and supplier management and just e-procurement and e-invoicing. So people said, gosh, we really have some pain points in this process, and depending on your organization, you kind of jump into those. So you start standing up all these niche cloud-based systems, which is great from a process standpoint within that sub-process. The problem, though, is that when you're really trying to manage an end-to-end process to really bring best practices and really, make to drive more value into it, now you're creating almost like a version of, SharePoint anarchy, kind of standing up lots of little different, tools and siloed systems, and you create this data proliferation problem. So what you're starting to see now is really a convergence towards source-to-pay suites and P2P suites as well. So this notion of how do you get the kind of integration that data integration and process integration that you kind of got with the old school ERP systems, which were these integrated business management systems, but doing it in a way that's actually world-class functionality or best-in-class, whatever, really bringing those best practices that I was talking about into the process. And I mean, there are a lot of related areas to this process. There's P cards, and there's supply chain, and there's asset management, and there's industry-specific tools. So I mean, there's there's other systems that you have to kind of integrate to and care and feed for. But what you're tending to see is a trend where it's like, okay, we've got some kind of legacy system or ERP system. How do we use that, let's say, for the system of record, so for let's say Supplier Master, and closing the books and make sure that the GL is accurate and working great. How do we integrate with that? So you see like three little integration arrows in terms of how do you make that integration. So I kind of call this, there's the system of engagement or process, there's the system of record, and there's system of decision around analytics. And really the big thing is use best-of-breed systems to really manage those end-to-end processes, that system of process and engagement to layer on top of, you might have multiple ERPs and legacy systems and whatever, but have a really good system that's going to engage end users through this end-to-end process, and then integrate some of the master data that you need to, and off to the side, have some analytics, whether it comes from that system of process, that source-to-pay suite, or whether it's something that you have, that sits on top, have the data that's really going to drive you to the improvement. So that's really what you're seeing around trends is use best of breed to get more value out of ERP rather than just completely throwing it away. And you got to work with IT on this because sometimes they have a vested interest around caring and feeding for those custom systems, but move away from point apps to these suites, move out of, having your own on-premise systems into the cloud. I mean, that is just the mega trend. There's no, really everybody's getting their custom stuff and moving it towards vanilla and moving it to the cloud. Focus on these business outcomes. Don't just install the software and say, oh, we're good to go. Nope, it's no good unless it's actually aligned to the business outcomes. And the way to do that is not to just have these empty applications that's like, oh, good luck, you're on your own. It's more and more, how do we bring best practices and capabilities through the cloud and through service providers into the tool to really use the technology, not to just support an existing process, but to really transform the process. And that's where you're starting to see new things around ecosystems and the providers, let's say, using their partners and their install bases to really drive new insights and new, value streams. And we could spend, just a whole bunch of time on just that topic. But that's generally what's happening in the technology trends. And I'm moving fast because I really want to make sure I get to some of the other speakers. And particularly, I want to draw in Max here because, he's out there day to day in the trenches, working with, with Coupa, but also just, ERP systems and public sector systems and seeing all this stuff. So, Max, what do you see on your side in terms of these trends over on the public sector side, and just any other insights you want to bring here?
Yeah, there's been a lot of energy in the market these days around really looking at these end-to-end e-procurement suites or source-to-pay suites and using those to help accelerate a transformation. So taking the leading practices that most of these platforms are built on, adapting the way that the clients or the organizations are actually doing procurement today, doing a quick gap analysis to understand how they move to these leading practices. And as opposed to in the past, where you had to do a lot of customization to systems, the trend is really to leverage the SaaS solution, so software as a service, where you can configure the system, not customize it, to actually take those leading practices and apply them to your organizational needs, whether it's from a policy perspective, a regulations perspective, or just the best practices within your organization. So that speed to value or that transformation that Pierre was talking about is accelerated by using these purpose-built solutions that are out there today.
Good. So I guess
great. Hey, just a point of clarification on one or two things that Max and Pierre. Pierre, maybe this is for you that you guys were just mentioning. So as an example, there's different options out there. And Pierre, you mentioned there's mega trends that are occurring. And as one example, we talked a little bit about the cloud-based deployment of procurement technology versus on-premises. Would it be the case that is a, by and large, better way to go, meaning the cloud versus on-premises is a better way to go, or does it really depend on the organization?
That's a good question. I mean, I'll tackle it, and then Max, I'd like to get your view on it. It is a mega trend for a reason, and I think the biggest, business reason is that the providers of the mega systems that were written as these giant, monolithic, systems, they just cannot keep up with the pace of change to support what you're trying to do in the business. It's like a giant, 6-axis, manufacturing machine or robot that's trying to, do everything versus the best practices, which is lots of little customizable machine tools that you can use. Sorry, I have a manufacturing, background. But so certainly I think that's one trend. But the other is just when you have this multi-tenant cloud-based, suite. What's great about it is it brings so much kind of scale to the system that basically when end users and an install base of a cloud provider are providing feedback around the tool, what's happening is you're getting these updates around new functionality and new spend categories and new personalization. And it's almost like it appears like, it's kind of like when you get a Tesla and, the software updates, every month or two, and it's like a brand new car. That is the power of the cloud. And you don't have to do anything around installing, new CDs and managing all the integration behind the firewall. It's much more seamless. Now, that does require changes. It requires how you document. It requires changes around, there are security concerns, and I think one of the things that you found is that the cloud systems quite often are much more secure than you would have in your own kind of locally hosted system, because that is their core. It is their best practice to really manage encryption at rest and all this whole technical stack that they have to manage, right? So there's a technical reason, there's an economic reason around it's just a lower TCO, and there's a business reason around bringing more functionality into these systems much more rapidly to deliver that transformational, aspect. So it's kind of a multi-headed beast on that one. So Max, I don't know, anything you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, hitting those points again, I think are critical as those releases. I think about it as I'm sitting here on my Apple phone, and the releases that I get from Apple to, I just accept it, and I have a new version of the platform itself. Really, we're seeing that across the SaaS solutions that are out there, the multi-tenant SaaS solutions, is you're getting that increased functionality. The user groups or the customers of those organizations are able to provide feedback, and that functionality is then incorporated, if it makes sense, across the user into those platforms and released to everybody. A great example of that, and I'm going to cover a slide here in a couple minutes, on a use case within the federal government, was that client wanted to have a display or flags that indicated small business, veteran-owned business, and was able to highlight that to the end users. We provide that feedback in this case, and with a couple releases out there, most of their customers are actually using that to identify, say, a laptop that's provided by a small business. So helping their policy goals by pushing that information out to the end user and accelerating their ability to see that and have the data collected against it. The other piece is benchmarking. So again, in the Coupa platform itself, there's the ability to see benchmarks of how, what's the speed of approving a PO, all sorts of data that's collected. It's blind to you, so you don't know actually which other company or other organization is specifically in there, but it's kind of giving you an overall trend what they're seeing across their platform. So there's another benefit of these multi-tenant systems.
Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening within the public sector in the way of procurement technology, right? How is it progressing within the public sector? So I'll tee up a couple of points for discussion. I think, Max, you've got a couple of examples and a case study that you're going to get into as well. But a couple of points. One, on the state government side within the U.S., a recent meeting among state CPOs, which just occurred just recently earlier this year. I've got a few highlights from that meeting that really emphasize the importance of procurement technology. Now, nearly half of all state CPOs explicitly mentioned procurement technology as a top priority for the current year. Overall, procurement technology ranked 4th in the top 10 priorities for state procurement in 2016. Above and beyond that, many states have various types of capabilities from a procurement technology standpoint that cover things like receiving bids and proposals, providing POs, doing contract award, conducting vendor registrations in an automated fashion, of course, sending out solicitations or RFPs from an e-procurement system. So these are examples of things on the state government side that are pretty preeminent and really underscore the importance of procurement tech and its evolution within government on the state side. And then, of course, within the U.S. federal government, there's multiple examples of technology being increasingly employed within the procurement context. So things such as the Common Acquisition Platform being implemented by the General Services Administration, the federal e-invoicing mandate that's come out from the Office of Management and Budget recently. So these are just a couple of examples. There's others, obviously. There's many, many others that are in play, but just to give us a general sense of the push behind procurement technology within the public sector. Max, I think you've got a couple of examples that you can speak to as well.
Yeah, just to highlight one bullet, the bottom right of the slide, and talks about commercial solutions. And really what I've seen both in the federal and state side is a strong push around the contracting or upfront acquisition side. What seems to be missing and where we're seeing the greatest value, especially in the commercial marketplace, but 100% transferable to the public sector, is around the actual purchasing. So the request and the marketplace kind of technology that's out there. So you go from potential savings, which are identified up front on the acquisition side or the sourcing side, into realized savings. So how do you actually have that hit the bottom line of your budget? That's really the big trend or push that I see going on now, and a lot of the questions that are coming out from all across the public sector, whether it's state, local, federal, is how do you actually take those contracts that have been strategically sourced, and how do you then have spend applied against that? There's a number of GAO reports that have been published over the last 10 years that talk about strategic sourcing and the upfront savings that have been identified but not being actually captured. On the state side specifically, there are many e-procurement systems that are out there that have been implemented. The state of Massachusetts has Combis, which is really trying to push the process down to the end user so they can purchase against those strategically sourced contracts at the state level, so that whether it's city or other entities within the state can buy and leverage the savings and collective bargaining power that they've been able to apply. The other value that I see within these systems, and Pierre hit this up earlier, was around the rich data that you have coming out of these systems. A lot of times what we see when we go out to clients and engage with them is the two largest categories are miscellaneous and other, just because it's not coded correctly. There's a great understanding of what we spend or what organizations spend with different suppliers. That's related back to the e-invoicing or just invoicing and AP data. But when you break that down further beyond just the top level spend, really understanding the who, what, when, and how they were purchased against those contracts or with that supplier, that gives you the rich data to go back and look at various ways of controlling spend. One example, I did a large, yes.
Sorry, I was just going to ask a question, and sorry I didn't interrupt your flow there, but it was funny. I actually sat in on that NASPO meeting. I was presenting there, and I was sitting through the roll call, and it was really fascinating how so many, and the question was, what was your biggest strategic, imperative and priority? And it was funny how all these, technology projects came up, but it wasn't really kind of strategic per se, because it was like, well, we're just trying to do an ERP upgrade, or we're trying to just get e-procurement fixed because it's just such a disaster. I mean, they seemed like they were just so mired down in just getting the basics around, e-procurement and just trying to and manage that in just a broader kind of context. And it seemed like procurement wasn't really driving a lot of the train around so much, around some of the IT. What's your take around, why is it that why is it stuck so early in the maturity curve?
I would say it goes back to really who owns the process, or who's really has the biggest vested interest in making these systems work. A lot of times what we've seen is it's a technology focus. I would submit that the trend that I'm seeing, and really the best in breed at this point, is focus on the process first and use the technology to support that. Especially in the SaaS type solutions that are out there, really the process is what's important and the technology enables it. In the past, it's really been the technology and then, customize it or adapt your process to whatever that technology can bring. I think that's the biggest shift, and really to benefit the most going forward is think about this from a process perspective and not the technology as much.
That's a big mindset shift. I mean, that seems like people have always been trained around, gosh, you got to be careful around the technologies because you select, because you're basically going to be automating the cow path, and you're never going to be able to change it because it was so hard to change it previously. But now it's really been flipped on its head, right? In terms of by using a new system, it actually enables you to change it more quickly. That's what it sounds like and what seems to be happening.
Absolutely, especially with the purpose-built systems, the ones that are designed, the e-procurement suites out there are designed to do this. So they're not designed to do everything across the board. They are purpose-built around the procure-to-pay process, which allows you to configure them, so make those small changes, but it's all built around that same standard process.
Yep. Sorry, I interrupted you, so proceed.
No, it's fantastic. The dialogue's wonderful. Dialogue's great. So why don't we just shift to the next slide? I'll talk about more about that example. So in 2013, we started working with a large federal agency, and the challenge was the executive we were working with was in charge of strategic sourcing and saw that there wasn't the penetration they thought against the strategically sourced contracts. He was doing a lot of market research and found Coupa and a couple other products that were out there at the time that were focused on e-procurement. And again, the biggest difference, and I think what's driving this in the marketplace, is the ability for the end user to find the exact products they're looking for. So when they're at home or when they're shopping on their own, most people don't really know what contract it's on or even who the supplier is. So when you go out to one of these e-commerce sites, it asks you, what do you need? So you type in, I need some running shoes, and pops up the solutions that they provide to you. And then you select that and purchase it. Sometimes it's coming from that website itself, or sometimes it's directly shipped from a third party. But when we come to work in the public sector, we have to know what contract it's on, who the supplier is, who the contracting officer is. So it's a different mindset. What these solutions do is take that normal activity that no one trained you how to use Amazon or any of the other e-commerce sites that are out there, takes that same focus and drives that now to business. So again, asking what you need. In the back end of the system, it's driving all the compliance pieces to it. So you're buying or you're requesting the approved products, the approved service on the right contracts at the right price points. That's all happening in the background. All the user knows now is it was easy to find what I needed. I was able to request it in a timely manner. It was approved, and all of a sudden I get my product or service. So that was the vision that this gentleman had in this agency. And so the agency selected Coupa and Deloitte to pilot the SaaS solution around IT hardware, which what they did at the time is they went out and sourced and purchased a large number of laptops, and then they would have those requested across the agency and delivered to those people who were requesting it. So that was what they envisioned on how to do this and push that information and the access to the system out to across the agency itself. They were very open to taking the leading practices. We were able to take the SaaS solution, take Coupa in this case, and configure it to meet their needs. So whatever additional information they needed to collect, which wasn't on the Coupa platform initially, we were able to configure those custom fields quickly and capture that information so they could then have reports in the future on that data. The approach they took to the RFP was one of the best I've seen. It was less of very prescriptive and feature function comparison and more of a solution-based outcome approach, which allowed all the different vendors who participated in the process to show the best of their abilities and really help drive the conversation and not just show features and functions. And last was a pilot approach, which they took and was successful. The challenge was, and this is true to any successful deployment of these technologies, is having that executive sponsorship to drive the full execution and full deployment. So we were able to get the pilot going, but then the challenges across the organization to get the full deployment rolled out was mostly because this gentleman was promoted and shifted his position, which was wonderful for the agency, a little bit challenging for the project. So really having that executive buy-in and transfer that and having that part of someone's goals, but also showing the value across the organization so everyone understands the benefits that these platforms can provide. Any questions on that? Or any insights from anybody, any of the other moderators? All right, why don't we just shift to the next one?
We're all talking on mute here, right?
Oh, okay.
No, go ahead.
All right,
so
to follow that up and really taking the lessons learned that I've seen both in the commercial and public sector side now is really having that key understanding of the procure-to-pay process and how those technologies, those purpose-built technologies that are out there today, will help you really move through a transformation. The increased controls, and when I say controls, that's also around compliance. So it's really driving all those factors in the back end, whereas the users are only seeing the ease of use on the front end. It also enables that you're not overspending on budgets. That budget information is clearly up front, or those controls are really easy to see as part of the overall request cycle. And then improved spend visibility and reporting, as we talked about. These systems have the ability to code everything as it's happening. And so you understand exact commodities that are being bought, what cost centers are coming from, what supplier, what items, and that's rich information to help you then engage with the suppliers. What we've seen in the past is a lot of organizations enter into contracts based on a projected volume of spend. So no guarantees, but a projected volume. And when you true it up at the end of the year, what was forecasted and executed were vastly different. What that does from a supplier base is they might not give you the best pricing or value because it's unclear on what you're actually going to be able to achieve. With good, rich data, you can show them and have a collaborative conversation. The next bullet is speed of value in the SaaS technologies that are out there. These are not building custom solutions. They're not even taking solutions that you have to do a lot of actual custom coding to, but they're taking leading practices and being able to just configure those to your processes and adapt anything that you need or additional information you need to capture on top of the leading practices that are already developed. So the speed to value and the speed to implementing these is much faster. The end user point of view. So having that guided buying experience or guided requesting experience is huge. And that's what really drives compliance and drives user adoption or adoption across the overall platform. If it's easy and intuitive for the distributed organization to use, then you'll see the value being brought out. Brandeis University implemented Coupa about 2 years ago, and higher education is a very fragmented user population, and they were able to work together with their user groups and configure the application, and they've got the user adoption rate there is over 90%, and they're seeing tremendous value from the overall platform. The other piece of it is calculating the total cost of ownership from implementation, maintaining license fees, all those pieces that go into a hosted solution or a SaaS solution. So really understanding all the components. And as Peter talked about earlier, is also understanding the risks associated from a security perspective, whether it's cloud or whether it's hosted, and kind of the leading practices that we're seeing from a lot of shift to the cloud providers and the rich security, because that is their core business that they're providing to their other clients. SaaS solutions are built to integrate. I think this is a key point. When we think about these solutions, they're not standalone solutions. So as Pierre had that slide up earlier, with all different functions around the source-to-pay process, and on the bottom he had the core systems that they integrate with. These systems are built to integrate, so they're not built to stand alone. The ease of integration is there. So really, as you think about it, it's augmenting that ERP system or augmenting those other systems that are out there and really driving the procure-to-pay process or that cycle on these purpose-built platforms. And then last is understanding and appreciating the differences between commercial and the public sector, but also really comparing and understanding the core procure-to-pay process up front on the contracting side, as we talked about earlier, and on the federal side around the FAR and state and local governments around the regulations and policies that have to be followed. The upfront piece and the contracting piece, there's a lot of purpose-built solutions around that or custom solutions that are out there today. But when you go from the request to pay side, really that's very similar processes, whether it's commercial or public sector. So truly understanding the policies and the requirements that truly apply, mapping those against those SaaS solutions that are out there today. And what I think you'll find is that they're built around the same kind of compliance and regulations that would work in the public sector as well as the private sector. And we're seeing that especially, there's been a lot of deployments in regulated industries such as banking, oil and gas, manufacturing, that have very, very rigorous compliance regulations, which are very, very similar to the public sector. So it really helps. It doesn't disrupt the process. It really augments and facilitates the implementation of these technologies. So let me pause there.
Hey Max, I got a quick question for you, and I'm sure Asha's going to jump in here in just a second. So, I am not I'm not a public sector, expert, and I actually tried to read the FAR. Actually, I tried to read the Dummies Guide to the FAR to just try to understand it. I didn't get very far in it, pardon the pun. But do you think it's really pretty amazing what I see in the technology solutions, the cloud-based, suites that are out there, and the extent that they can kind of help shield the end users from some of the complexity and to kind of accommodate that complexity. So in terms of, all right, for if you want to support some spend on P card, but you want to have other that's three-way match and other that's two-way match or dynamic, and and you talked about guided buying and really guiding people right from the get-go when I have a need, and kind of virtual catalogs and all this really cool stuff. Do you think that do you think like in public sector, are you starting to see that the technology could really be useful in not just shielding the end user from some of the complexity and also being compliant with some of the regs as they stand right now, but as things change, you can kind of dynamically configure it, but also add, let's say, industry specific training and other things that can really talk to the talent management pain points, and the fact that the technology can actually help with kind of computer-based training that's done like on the fly as part of the business process. I mean, do you see like these systems really helping to solve some of the systemic kind of, policy, procedure, complexity, and talent types of issues that seem to be a challenge in the public sector?
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, it's, if these systems are implemented properly, it's going to take all those components into play and take that guided buying experience or guide requesting experience and having all those compliance aspects to it fire in the background, where the user is really enjoying the experience as they would at home when they're using Amazon or something like that. They're going in there and putting in what they need. It's providing them either a point of contact, a form to fill out, or if it's on a catalog, the ability to just select that and then process that into a cart and have it go through the right approval process. So using those dynamic approvals, if IT has to be involved, if legal has to be involved, or other entities within the organization, it's flowing through that process to then be approved and then shift over into a purchase order to the vendors who then supply it, and you can manage it that way. So it accelerates that process. I think the other piece of it is the consistency. And that's one of the things that I've heard from the vendor community is the consistency of how the FAR is interpreted or other regulations are interpreted depending on who the contracting officers are. So that consistency across that organization, working to harmonize the interpretations so you have a one perspective for that agency, and it's consistent both for internal users and also for the supplier base.
Makes sense.
Overall,
okay,
it's
great.
very, very beneficial.
Great. Sorry, I didn't mean to butt in there, but I wanted to make sure we save some time at the end for questions and answers. So Max and Pierre, thanks so much for those rich perspectives. Jonathan, I'd like to turn it over to you to take us through the questions that have come up from participants.
Sure thing. We got a question here that, Max, I think you have addressed, but I didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to say about it, which was if you had already have a custom solution deployed, won't going with a third-party supplier diminish your functionality and create disruption? I think you've addressed that point, but if there's anything else you'd like to say about that, by all means.
Yeah, so if the current platform today that you're using is a custom-built solution, as you look and if you're going to implement one of these SaaS platforms, I would say take the best of what you saw in that system and compare that against the standard process and make sure that they're true requirements. I don't think it will disrupt in a negative way. I would submit that it will disrupt in a positive way, and that you see much more compliance to the purchasing process than you did on your custom system.
Yeah, let me just chime in real quick on that point. I mean, that's a good question. A lot of this is just an organizational thing and just about how you frame it, right? So let's frame it as there was an investment made in that custom system, and maybe it's not generating the returns. So you could just continue throwing good money after bad, or you could say we've made this investment. How do we get a good return on it, right? So how do we take the things that may be useful from that custom system? Maybe there's maybe it's the supplier master, or maybe there's some specific functionality. Great. The power of these new systems that Max is talking about is that they're so flexible, and with the integration, is that you can kind of wrap the custom systems with this new functionality, so that you can actually get some returns out of it. So if IT has gone down this path, or whatever, great. Let's see the pieces that are really useful and that we want to retain, and then let's kind of get value out of it by bringing stuff that actually encourages adoption that might use the data in that custom system, but in a way that's much faster than your IT department or custom vendor could ever do. So try to use it as an opportunity and offer out the olive leaf to say, look, this is a way we can actually get some payback on that data warehouse that you built. Now we're going to put some windows into it so we can actually use it, and get some data and drive some value. So sometimes it's just flipping the mental model on it a bit too.
Sure. Great. We also have a question here from Joseph Sandor from Michigan State University. It's a good question. He said, good analysis, overview, and trends. Can you address the implications for talent acquisition, development, and retention? That's
a big one. Just limited time. I'll just get to just a quick snippet. So one is, technology-related competencies are just one of many competencies in the whole, around all of the skills and talent and skills and competencies that you need within the procurement function. And I think one of the things that's important is that technology just doesn't sit in isolation. It actually supports other competencies, as well. So being able to use it in problem solving and analytics and helping with some of the domain-specific skills that you need around negotiations. And quite often, those tools are bringing best practices, and those best practices are part of the talent that's needed. So you can actually use the technology to improve competencies that you have, not just technology in its own right. So yeah, it's great to learn Excel and pivot tables and things that you can kind of take anywhere. But really, the technology more and more is being used as a vehicle for delivering, training and knowledge transfer to kind of, take that knowledge and put it into the system, and it makes it much more easily transferable to the folks that are on there, and also just all the online training and all the things that are built into these modern platforms. The technology is really being explicitly used to help with, not just the implementation project. And Max, maybe you can talk a little bit about this, but definitely it's synergistic. Technology is synergistic with talent management.
Yeah, actually, I see this as attracting new talent into procurement. So not the view of procurement as a place that perhaps you did on rotation or a place that you went from a buyer to someone who's doing sourcing now, but attracting really high potential talent in there based on all the different skills that you need to be successful and engaging the overall organization. So everything from the change management to the data analytics to the negotiations piece of it, all these technologies with the rich data help reinforce that and really make, as opposed to somewhere that you got assigned, making procurement a destination for high-performing talent and really attractive for folks and across different generations, and millennials who are coming into the workforce is really an exciting place to be because you can measure the value you add to the organization.
That's great. And I think that takes us right up against our time here. We've about 30 seconds left. So I'll just take this time to say thank you so much to Ash, Max, and Pierre for your presentations. Really insightful stuff. Really appreciate it. For everybody who attended, you'll be getting an email soon with the presentation. So I know we covered a lot very quickly, so if you want to go back through, by all means, you can do that. And thank you to Coupa, our sponsor, for making this event possible. And if you want to know more about Public Spend Forum, visit publicspendforum.net. There's a lot of ways you can join us as we help to improve public spending and really collaborate with all stakeholders. So thanks again for your time. Thanks to our presenters, and hopefully we'll see you at another webinar.